This is a People First Radio podcast.
Charlotte Lee says that weight gain following a diagnosis of a mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder is common. But she says support for people on how to navigate that situation is often lacking. Lee led a study published in the October edition of The Lancet Psychiatry. It explored how people's weights evolved over a period of 15 years, looking at both people with and without diagnoses of a certain group of mental illnesses. The population-based study looked at records for more than 100,000 people in the UK. Charlotte Lee joined me to speak more on the issue.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a research fellow and chartered psychologist at the University of Bristol in the UK. Before this, I spent almost a decade at the University of Oxford, where the bulk of my training and research was done. And in fact, it's where I still do a bit of research and teaching. So I'm excited to share much of that work with you today.
And you've written that rapid weight gain following a diagnosis of a mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder is not only common, but predictable. Can you explain to me how this issue plays out?
Sure. A good place to start would be with defining the key concepts, which is SMI. That's the term I use in the article. SMI, or severe mental illness, to be clear, is not a clinical diagnosis. It's actually a term we use in research and policy, used to describe people, as you noted, with schizophrenia spectrum or bipolar disorder. And these are chronic and enduring diagnoses, often characterized by seeing, hearing, and believing things not based on reality. But I want to be clear, this doesn't minimize other mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, which in themselves can be severe. Every diagnosis matters. I, however, focus on people with SMI because they have the highest risk profiles and service care needs that can be differentiated from people with other mental illness, or indeed the general population who don't experience any mental illness at all. So to dive into that a little bit further, we have known for a long time now that people with SMI, like schizophrenia spectrum and bipolar disorder, tend to have poorer physical health. For example, they are twice as likely to have heart disease. So to picture that, imagine a small office or a room with 10 people. Normally one person might develop heart disease, but in a group of 10 people with SMI, about 2 of them would. Now, if you zoom out to the population level, that adds up to a lot of people. It's around 2 million people in the UK, where I'm from, or about 1 million people in Canada. So you can see that this is a significant public health issue. If we want to prevent CVD, or heart disease, I should say, we need to backpedal a little bit and look at its risk factors. And often the biggest but most overlooked one is overweight and obesity. Up to 80% of people with SMI will have a body mass index that falls within the overweight or obese range, compared to about 2/3 in the general population. But here's the thing, we've never really known how that has happened. Is it a case that weight shoots up right after someone is diagnosed with SMI, perhaps linked to medication or lifestyle changes? Or does it creep on in a more stealth manner over several years once people are more stabilized in terms of their mental health? And that distinction does matter, of course, because it tells us when we should intervene. If weight gain happens really soon after diagnosis, then that's obviously where we should focus on prevention and support. And so to answer that question, I have led the longest and largest study of its kind. I looked at primary care records of over 100,000 people in the UK, going as far back as 1998. And because health records are all digitalized now, scientists like me can access those records in a way that simply would not have been possible using the old paper and pen format. Here's what I did. I found everyone in their primary care practice who had been newly diagnosed with SMI, and I paired them up with people in the same practice who had the same age, gender, and starting weight, but did not have a diagnosis of SMI. And that matching is really important because it means we're comparing like for like, so we can isolate the effects of the mental illness on weight as opposed to anything else. And I then followed them up for the entire follow-up period. Every time they went to their doctor, they stepped on the scales and had their weight measured. I was able to pull out that data and plot it on a chart. And what I found was striking. People with SMI gain about 5 kilograms more than people without SMI over a period of 15 to 20 years. Now, 5 kilograms may or may not sound like a lot to some people, but it's roughly the weight of a small toddler. And I observed that this happens really quickly within the first 5 years of a diagnosis. What's more concerning, though, Joe, is that while people with SMI are slightly more likely to be told to lose weight, they aren't getting any support or any more support to lose it. And that's really important because this is obviously a group that, as I have said, have a much higher risk profile for heart disease. So we're obviously noticing a problem here, but we're not connecting people with the services that they deserve. And to end on that note, the numbers show an early and lasting problem, but they also show possibility. And with this information, we can act. The pattern is clear enough that we can now design better care for people with SMI.
Were you able to get a sense of why this phenomenon might be happening, of weight gain following diagnosis?
Why the weight gain was so rapid in the years after a diagnosis? Well, weight gain, as we know, is incredibly complex. In any person, it is going to be influenced by a combination of genetics and biological factors, right through to psychological and sociopolitical. But for people with SMI, there is the additional factor of medication. Antipsychotics are the mainstay and gold standard treatment for people with schizophrenia, and they will be indicated for some people with bipolar disorder. But we know from clinical trials that they cause quite rapid weight gain over a period of weeks to months. But as I said, we really didn't know what was happening thereafter once people leave these trials and go on to live their normal lives. So we do have strong evidence that it is the antipsychotics that are interacting with other factors that are driving the weight gain. If you have time, I can tell you a bit more about those mechanisms. But suffice to say, most antipsychotics will act on weight via multiple pathways simultaneously. But here's the thing. In my study, I showed that people with severe mental illness who are not taking antipsychotics still gained more weight than people from the general population, just a little bit less than those with SMI and who are taking antipsychotics. So in other words, there is something else going on, and we believe that the additional drivers of weight gain in this patient group might be behavioral or social. And that's actually good news because that's amenable to change and it gives us an area to focus on.
You talked about the fact that this phenomenon exists. You've got this study in the Lancet Psychiatry, which now documents it in a very concrete way, but you feel like more could be done to address it. What do you feel like could be done?
Well, I think there are multiple points that we can intervene post-diagnosis and in the aftermath of a diagnosis. What I would like to see happen, and this is drawing upon my other research that I have published, is a very clear and comprehensive chat by the person or the healthcare professional initiating antipsychotics with the patient on the expected side effects, which do include sedation, but weight gain, but they might also include sedation. Very often, the patients with whom I speak with tell me that no such chat was ever initiated. And it is so important to patients in order to feel that they have some autonomy and expectation around where their health might go. So initiating early discussions around expected weight gain, and you might have to have several of those conversations. Then, once a person knows that they can expect to gain weight, I would like to see monitoring of weight in mental health services, for example, early intervention for psychosis units, in primary care, or even in secondary care. And actually, I think we're already pretty good at that across the UK, most of Western Central Europe, as well as the States and Canada. Weight monitoring is by and large complete and accurate. In the UK, that's because we have national targets to invite people who do have SMI into an annual health review. And family doctors are, in some instances, incentivized to monitor and record weight. But what we need to get a little bit better at is translating that monitoring into action. I feel like this is where we currently fall short. So once we have set up a mechanism to flag when a patient with SMI is gaining weight quite rapidly after their diagnosis, we need to be making referrals to local weight loss groups, which at the moment is simply not happening, even though there are weight loss groups out there that are working for the general population and have shown to be effective for people who have SMI as well. So the message here is, for me, quite clear. Weight gain can be prevented if we act early and proactively. We can stop avoidable health problems before they start.
You're listening to People First Radio. My guest is Charlotte Lee. She's a research fellow and chartered psychologist at the University of Bristol. We're speaking about a study she led into the issue of weight gain following a diagnosis of mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. A study led by Lee on the subject was published in the October edition of the journal The Lancet Psychiatry. Could you tell me more about the effectiveness of community weight loss groups that you just referred to there? Can you tell me in more detail like what those groups look like and what the effectiveness looks like?
Sure. A good place to start there would be how they work for the general population. So these are weight loss groups that can last anywhere between 12 to 24 weeks. Typically, a person will go once a week, sometimes twice a week. It really depends on what they want to get out of it, either in person or online. And in those groups, they might set weight loss goals, targets on what they want to change around their dietary intake and physical activity, and they will regularly monitor progress towards those goals. I do want to say here that it is not always about weight and the number on the scale. Sometimes weight loss can be around making small dietary changes across your day-to-day life. It's not always about the number on the scale there. And these programs exist for the general population across Europe and the States and Canada. They are commissioned for anyone who meets the eligibility criteria to access them. But what we see is that people with SMI are less likely to be referred to them, despite pretty good, robust evidence that when referred, people with SMI can lose the same amount of weight commensurate with the general population when they access them. What might be going on is a fatalistic or nihilistic view among practitioners that weight gain is inevitable in this population and not amenable to change. Or it might be a view that patients with SMI need a little bit of extra support going to these groups. Imagine you've just had a mental health crisis where your entire world has been flipped upside down. Then imagine trying to get onto the bus and go into a room of strangers in a weight loss group. That can feel incredibly daunting and overwhelming. And it's understandable why some patients with SMI might avoid it altogether. So the extra support might be linking them with peer supporters, with care coordinators, with link workers who are available and will stand by them, taking those baby steps towards change. Or, of course, we can't rule out the possibility of designing a entirely bespoke service, a bespoke weight loss service, specifically geared towards this group. We just haven't got that far yet.
There can be a lot of stigma when it comes to SMI, when it comes to diagnoses like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. There can also be a lot of stigma around weight gain. How do you take both of those things into account when discussing this, and how do you think those stigmas play into this issue?
That is such an important point, isn't it? Both mental illness and obesity separately carry an enormous amount of stigma, both public, structural, as well as self or internalized stigma. But when the two overlap, it can render a person feeling completely invisible and indefensible. I think we have come a long way from seeing either mental illness or obesity as a matter of personal failure or lack of personal resolve. And we have made strides in recognizing that it is the combined effect of many interacting factors, some of which I have outlined, from the genetics to the biological, the psychological, and sociopolitical. But with this group in particular, who have the double hit of both mental illness and obesity, as I said, I do believe there are nihilistic views that proliferate across healthcare that posit that people with mental illness simply cannot lose weight because of the effects of the antipsychotics, which are strong drivers of weight gain. And my research, the one that was published this month, as well as the research on clinical trials around weight loss programs, simply debunks this belief that people with SMI cannot lose weight. So I think we have a long way to go in challenging that, and that's why platforms like yours, Joe, provide an excellent opportunity to advocate for that. The most powerful thing we can do, though, is to treat everyone, regardless of their mental illness, obesity, or sometimes the effect of both, with dignity, to listen to their experience, to put people first and build services with them, not just for them, to make it possible to set them up to succeed.
Is there a perception that you're at all aware of that perhaps more awareness of this issue could lead people to be less likely to seek help or seek treatment for a diagnosis of a severe mental illness?
Well, these are two sensitive topics. The topic of mental illness and obesity in their own right are deeply personal. But when you combine the two, it can be even more sensitive for some people. But I think the only way that we are going to move forward and make progress is by doing exactly what you're doing, which is inviting people like myself, but other experts in the field, to hold conversations on the problem that has been hiding in plain sight for years, if not decades, which is the burden of poor physical illness that people with SMI carry, but are not being supported to change. So, of course, it can, they're deeply personal and sensitive topics, but if we're able to speak about it openly, sincerely, earnestly, and engage with each other in a way where we can design solutions that work for patients and practitioners with the resources that we have available to us, then I believe that's a good start. That's where progress is to be made.
Let's say I'm not an expert or a clinician, and I'm not at the moment someone who's affected by, or let's say anyone in my close circle is affected by a severe mental illness diagnosis. What do you think I need to take away from a conversation like this about the issue of severe mental illness and rapid weight gain following diagnosis?
Oh, that's a good question. I might need a minute to think about that. The first point I would make is behind every number is a person living with a very challenging diagnosis and trying to live the best that they can. So behind every number on the scale, behind every data point in my study is a real person struggling and trying to do the best with what they have available to them. And if we can, as I said before, see people with dignity and compassion and care, then I think that will go some way in reducing the stigma that surrounds two very complex topics, which is mental illness and obesity. I think we also need to remove this is sort of a moralistic appeal now, but remove any sense of blame. Mental illness and obesity are no one's fault. As I said, they are complex drivers to both, but when combined, it becomes even more complex. But that's not to strip away any sense of autonomy that something can be changed about it if a person wants to and feels sufficiently capable and supported to do so. I mean, I speak with patients who very often will say meal times with the family are so difficult because I feel shamed as to what I'm eating, but I often feel like I don't have control over it because of the antipsychotic medications that I'm taking, or because of how bad I feel with my mental illness, or how isolated and alone I feel. Sometimes food is a much needed source of comfort. Some people will say that, not everyone does. But if we can sort of sit and hold space and try to appreciate our patients and the people with whom have a diagnosis that are around us, whether they're a loved one or family member or friend, and just be willing to understand them as a person, not a number or a diagnosis, a bit more, then I think that can really be a good starting point to shifting the needle on how we support patients who are so often underserved in both research and care.
Charlotte Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Charlotte Lee is a research fellow and chartered psychologist at the University of Bristol. We were speaking about a study she led, published in the October edition of The Lancet Psychiatry. It was called Weight Trajectories and Access to Weight Management Services in Individuals with Severe Mental Illness in the UK, a population-based matched cohort study. You can find the full text of the study online.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.